figure it might be interesting to show what is physically inside of one of these power chair motors. This is from a Permobil M3. They also fit the M5, M300, and while they would bolt up to a C300, they don't fit very well, and the neutral lever wouldn't work properly. But it would be possible to install them if you remove the plastics, which that's what I did on the steampunk chair. So, let's go ahead and, got a brand new table here. I'm probably gonna get this thing dirty. Let's go ahead and take this thing apart here and see what's going on inside of it. There's a few different basic types of power chair motors. This one is what's known as a 2-pull motor, which means it has 2 brushes. You can see the brush housings here and here. There's one on each side. 4-pull motors have more torque, and there'll be 4 of these around the different sides. 4-pull motors don't necessarily have more speed, but they have more power. They use those in the HD chairs or the ones that are bigger and heavier. These motors are actually a good combination. They've lengthened the windings on these, so they have a lot more power. These 2-pull motors have just as much torque as any of the 4-pull motors that I've played around with. Permobil, whoever they're contracting with to build these, has actually made a pretty superior product. First off, what we're gonna do is remove the brake from the back of this. That's held on with some Allen screws. I've gone ahead and marked this with a black mark right here on the brake unit and the motor, because these can go back on in different orientations, and I want to make sure it goes back on the same way that I took it off of here. So 3 screws. This is your brake unit here, and this is the output shaft of the motor here. Basically, there's a little gear-shaped piece here, as you can see as the motor turns, that interfaces with this brake unit right here. You can see that's also got a hexagonal pattern on it. This isn't really plastic, but it's sort of a polymer type material. There's a big magnet inside here and some springs. When you're stopped and the chair is not moving, those springs are holding this from moving. See how this doesn't move at all now? But if I put it in neutral, now this part will spin freely. It physically requires power to turn them off. This is what that clicking sound is this big metal plate moving back and forth in here. I'll pull this apart in a little bit. Now for the motor, we've got 2 big Phillips screws here. Before I pull those out though, I'm gonna take the brushes out, because those will be in the way when we pull the housing off of this. We just have a little cap here that holds the brush in, and there's a little carrier, and the brush assembly is here. You can see the end of it's round. That goes up against one of the spinning parts inside the motor. When you're taking the brushes out of these motors, you want to make sure they go back in the same direction, because they will actually fit in there either way. It's not going to cause a problem necessarily, but they kind of wear in their position, and they might make noise if you put them in backwards. It won't physically hurt anything, it'll just be noisy. And also they should go back in the same slot. This is a motor though that I'm not going to be using for anything, so at this point I don't really care. So we're just gonna take that out of there. Before we take the motor housing apart, let's go ahead and pull the gearbox off. It uses sort of some Star Torx bits. That's what those are, Torx bits. Okay, so we just broke this bolt. It snapped off inside there. So now we're 100% not going to be able to use these motors. Cool, I guess. Let's see if these other ones will come out of here without breaking. I'm going to go in and out a little bit to try and free them up. Oh, that one snapped off too. Alright, we're doing good now. Well, this thing is now officially a show and tell piece, because all the bolts are breaking off. That's why I do this stuff, so you guys don't have to. It looks like this one's alright. I'd like to point out I'm using a stubby socket, and I don't have, I mean, I've got pretty good strength, but I don't have enough to break a bolt typically. So I think that means these were probably installed too tightly, or it's a really, see, that's what they're supposed to look like. Or this is a really crummy grade of metal they've used. There's the input to the gearbox. This little part here, it's sort of a coupler that couples the motor shaft to the gearbox. There's our main motor drive unit there. Now these Phillips screws are extremely long. They go all the way through the motor and then attach down here. You can actually see the threads right here. Those are these screws. Now these should not be very tight because they're just supposed to be snug and it kind of holds the whole assembly together. If there's too much torque on these, it'll cause problems with how the motor works. And yeah, as I thought, they come out super easily. Okay, now it looks like here I need to remove this little keeper before the rest of it's going to come apart. All right, snap ring removed. Now we have to remove this output keeper here, which has some little tiny hex screws that hold it in place. So just back those off a little bit. All right, keeper has been removed. This is also what engages with the brakes. And now, I can pull out these really long screws. Yeah, so 2 of these hold the entire chassis of the motor together. Now this should come apart. All right, there we go. Got a little thrust washer in here. It's kind of a wavy washer. It puts a little bit of preload on the bearings. This is the brush holder into the motor, and your brushes go down through these little slots here, and see where they pop through onto the inside. And that slides over the commutator on the motor, which is this shiny part here. So those physically rub on this. You can see the marks there. You can see the marks there where those have rubbed. And then you can kind of see the windings down inside here and the magnets on the side. Yeah, you can see where those bolts twisted off on the gearbox assembly. I could take the keeper off this end, or I could pull the magnet housing off. These magnets are very powerful, and pulling this off is usually kind of difficult, and sometimes you can smash your fingers. But I've done it a few times, so let's see if we can do it without too much trouble. All right, there we go. And here we have the windings on the motor. Now this is what makes these motors special. This section here is a lot larger by probably at least an inch more than previous motors that Permobil has made. The length of these windings is what gives the motor its power. And all these wires that are wrapped around here, they're wrapped around and around and around. It basically turns all these pieces here into an electromagnet. This is where the magnets are inside, as you can see. These windings are in here. They're not in contact, they're just very, very close. The bearings on each end of this hold it so it's inside here without actually touching the magnets. And that's basically it. And since we're in here, let's go ahead and take apart this brake mechanism and show you how these things work. These are pretty simple. There's just a few torque screws that hold the unit together. Inside here is where all the magic happens. So we've got the outer cover, and then we have this sort of a, it's not plastic, it's that polymer sort of material. The mating surface is here on the edge, and it clamps against this surface where you can see the wear marks, and the other half clamps against this disc right here. So the sound you're hearing when your brakes click is this part being pulled downwards by this coil. This is a big coil right here, and when you move your chair, electricity goes through here, powers up this coil, and forces this thing down. There's a big spring on the back half of this. You can see the gap there. Then when I flip this, the gap goes away, and you can see here how this gets forced upwards when the brakes are on. I'll show you inside here. See the center part here? How it's flush with the outside? And now it pops up. There's a big spring underneath this, and right now the brakes are on, so this thing's popped up. What happens when the power goes in here, these magnets turn on and force this plate down, and it forces it down enough to compress that spring, which you can see here on the back. Look at this gap right here. See how that moves a little bit? So the magnet is forcing this to have more space and then allows this to spin freely inside here. See, right now there's nothing, and now it moves. Essentially, when you're running around, you're harnessing the awesome power of magnets for your chair to work. Now, they call this a brake. It's actually just a parking brake. This has nothing to do with slowing you down or bringing you to a stop. All this does is firmly clamp the motor from spinning when you're already stopped. Now, what I can do here is actually power this up to show you what's going on. I think, okay, so these operate on 24 volts. Some chairs have 12 volt brakes and some have 24 volt brakes, but almost every chair out there uses 24 volt motors. Random information. Let me see if I can find a battery or something to power this up to show you. Maybe you remember these from the other day. They're actually gonna come in handy right now. We're gonna hook these batteries up in series. We're gonna hook the positive to negative on these center two. We'll clip this on here. Clip this on here. Now, something should happen. Ha! Okay, so, pretend this is your power chair, and that's the motor. Your gearbox would be attached up here. And ignore this top spinning part because that's on a bearing. But as you can see here, when I try to turn this, nothing happens. But if I hit the brakes, now it rotates just fine. When I let go, it stops. So that's basically all these are. They're a parking brake. They keep you from moving when you're stopped. It is interesting to note though, it is possible to overpower these. These motors have plenty of torque. I can actually turn it by hand. So this is not an inherently strong clamping force, but when you couple the amount of friction this provides with the gearbox and the wheels attached, it keeps you from moving. So that's your fancy brake clicking sound, is this piece of metal flopping around in here. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of reassemble this motor a little bit, just to make it easier for carrying it around and not losing parts and stuff. This slides over here, and you'll see that the magnetic force, when I get this close, it's gonna pull them together. And this little bearing right here goes inside of this race right here. So this piece holds this center shaft. See how it moves? It holds the center shaft together and keeps everything lined up the way it should be. We'll stick the thrust washer back on there. Alright, got those lined up. Try and stick these screws down through here now. Okay, things back together now. You can see the motor spins freely, no problems at all. We'll put our little coupler back on here. Tighten down the set screws. Hands are starting to get shaky after all this. Okay, those are on there. We'll put this in an unlocked position so that this moves freely. And we can stick that back on the coupler here. There we go. And line up our mark, which was over here. And when you're reinstalling these screws, you can see where they go through to this notch right here and screw right into the motor. And there's 3 of those that hold the brake unit on, including the one with this little wire clip on it. Okay, our motor has been reassembled. Turns freely. Brake mechanism still works good. It looks like at least one of these bolts that broke off is sticking out of here far enough that I might be able to use my Nypex pliers to remove it. So let's try that real quick. That is stuck in there. I'm just twisting the bolt. Oh, I think I know what happened here. See this green stuff around the bolt holes? I do believe that is permanent grade Loctite. It actually makes sense. They put thread locker in here to keep those from coming loose. And that is the type of thread locker that you have to use a torch or apply heat to get it to come loose. Okay, that actually makes sense. Huh. Well, the more you know, I guess. Wow, this is surprisingly light. I thought it would be heavier. I suppose we could take this apart. I have a feeling it's just a big worm gear and a planetary gear set, but hey, we're already here, might as well, right? These, I believe, might be filled with transmission fluid. They might be full of grease, I'm not sure, but this will potentially make a mess. My guess, though, is this gearbox is very simple. I think it's just got a big worm gear on the top, and then it's got a big gear in the middle. Oh, yep, it's filled with oil. There we go. All right. So we've got a really nice cast aluminum housing here with a really nice non-shielded roller bearing. The main drive gear is plastic. Wow, look at that. It's yeah, so we've got our I'm trying to say worm gear up here on top. But this main drive gear is plastic, or like a poly material. That's interesting. Never would have thought. It's not gear oil, it's just like, seems like motor oil or something like that. But yeah, I've got our nice bearing here. Never would have guessed. Okay, well, let me, can't really set this down because it's gonna make a mess, but anyways, you get the idea. You can see there's a big gear, there's teeth here on the edges. And this gear on the top here turns and rotates the whole thing. These are very high quality machine parts though. This is a lid for that gearbox. It's got an O-ring that goes around here to seal everything. And this thing is lightweight. I mean, this is like less than half a pound. It's not really fair to call it plastic. It's got to be, it actually looks sort of like a Delron type material, which is a combination of epoxy resins that forms sort of a plastic looking type material, but is very, very tough. Makes sense that they're using that in here. I mean, permobil motors are quiet. They don't make any noise. And you can see here, I'm not sure how much use this motor has on it. I mean, I don't think it was used crazy, but the fluid in here, well, that's dirt on my finger, but the fluid in here is still clean. So it looks like we've got, you know, an aluminum, maybe an aluminum screw shaft there. So as these things wear, all you're getting is maybe a little plastic particles, but it's not going to be anything that's going to be detrimental to the gearbox at all. Nice and quiet, they're lightweight, and you don't ever, I would assume you never have to change the oil in this because we don't have any metal on metal parts, so we're not going to get metal shavings or anything else. Yeah, this is a very, very nice piece of equipment here. I'm gonna connect this up with the electric screwdriver on the coupler here just to give you an idea of what this thing looks like when it's in motion. Well, there we go. I actually learned some stuff. These are actually a lot nicer equipment than I thought they were. I mean, I knew they were nice, but everything in them is machined really nicely, fits together well. They've got good high quality bearings, Delron gears, which is maintenance free. I mean, I don't know how many miles you can get on these, but they basically shouldn't ever wear out. All the shielded bearings and everything they're using on these motors are super high end. They're, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that $35,000 for a chair is a deal, but I get a little bit more of an idea now as to why they're so expensive. There's a lot of engineering and design that goes into this stuff. And, I don't know, it gives me a little bit more respect, I guess, for the equipment and how it keeps working reliably. I mean, all this stuff is set up that there really shouldn't be any weak points, and failure on this stuff, as long as it's maintained, is going to be pretty minimal.
Pardon me?
Am I allowed to have a table set up?
You can have a table set up, we just can't. You'd be surprised at how many people try and conduct business.
What do you mean by conducting business?
Like
customers coming in and selling stuff or something?
or getting stuff ready to take to a customer.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, no, nothing like that. You heard the lady. Nothing's for sale. You guys aren't allowed to buy any of this.